Menelik II became emperor of Ethiopia in 1889. He was a powerful ruler, and he came along at a time when one of his primary goals was to try to unite a fractured country. Now, there was something about Menelik II that was interesting. He had this interest in technology. Again, keep in mind the date, 1889 and into the early 1900s. When he was there, one of the things that he wanted to do, especially with technology, was to be able to use it to help maintain law and order. Knowing that, it wouldn't be surprising when you find out that he ordered 3 electric chairs from New York and had those shipped to Ethiopia. What we might find interesting after we know that is to realize that those chairs were not operational in Ethiopia, because at that time Ethiopia had no electrical grid in place. And so the emperor did a most interesting thing with these 3 electric chairs. Actually, I'm not sure what he did with the other 2, but with one chair he built a platform, had that built, had the electric chair sat there, and that became his throne. Now that just sounds all kinds of odd, doesn't it? An instrument of death was used as a sign of power and authority. Well, now all of a sudden it has a tie to us and our lesson this morning, doesn't it? An instrument of death used as a sign of power and authority. Because this morning we think about the cross of Jesus Christ. Jesus, who died on a cruel cross, is a phrase that we would use, that we would sing about. We also keep this verse in mind, Luke chapter 9, verse 23, where Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." So now we've gone beyond just it being an instrument of death and Jesus dying on the cross, but now it is also a challenge for our discipleship of what it will mean for us as we claim to be followers of Jesus. People in Jesus' day did not wear a cross. In fact, what history tells us is that it was really sometime into the 4th century before the cross was actually used and recognized in a public way as far as any form of art. We need to understand this. I'm going to just recount some historical facts as I learned them in preparation for this lesson. When I tell you that the cross was an instrument of death for the Roman government, that is really putting it as lightly as I think I can. Here are some examples. Caesar Augustus bragged about capturing 20,000 runaway slaves during a time of rebellion. He gathered those slaves together, and every slave that was not reunited with his owner was crucified. There's another story that is told where it says that there were rebellious slaves rose up against Rome. 6,000 of them were crucified on a major roadway that led up to Rome. A third story, 2,000 people in Palestine were crucified for rebelling against the authority of Rome. What do those stories tell us? It tells us that in Rome at that particular time that the cross was an instrument of death, and the Romans used it often. Very insightful information. This is from the book by Philip Yancey entitled "The Jesus I Never Knew." Yancey writes, "It took time for the church to come to terms with the shame of the cross. Church fathers forbade its depiction in art until the reign of Roman Emperor Constantine, who had a vision of the cross and who also banned it as a method of execution. Thus, not until the 4th century did the cross become a symbol of faith. As C.S. Lewis points out, The crucifixion did not become common in art until all who had seen a real one died off. Let that sink in, church. The cross was not used as a symbol of art. And as I was preparing for this lesson, I think about the fact that I know that Abby has a necklace that's a cross. Many of you might as well. If you look on the handles of our doors, there's a cross. There's a cross that's placed before us. Crosses on the top of our communion trays. Those are all intended to help remind us of what Jesus did for us. But understand, there was a long time that would have never been placed there because the cross was an instrument of death. And only did it become recognized and used in this way after people had no longer witnessed one personally. That's significant, isn't it? Jesus' death on the cross was a death of shame. It was a death of sacrifice. And it was a death of hope for us. Through that sacrifice, we find forgiveness of our sins. But remember this verse we want to keep before us, where it's this challenge for us. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Now, and I keep bringing that verse up because throughout this month, we're going to look at a series that is entitled Upside Down Teachings. And when we start putting the cross before us, church, I have to tell you that in the eyes of the world, the cross is an upside down teaching, an instrument of death that becomes a message of hope. Even the Apostle Paul wrote about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, where he says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God." The world does not understand the message of the cross. Only when we begin to understand and to grasp what Jesus has done for us can we see the cross as a message of hope and forgiveness. Now, let's go ahead. Let's make sure we have our Bibles open in Luke chapter 9. I want us to back up just a few verses to make sure that we have this Luke chapter 9, verse 23 in its proper context. We're going to back up Luke chapter 9 and begin reading in verse 18. Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets of long ago that has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Peter answered, "God's Messiah." Now, Jesus started there and he had two big questions. He asked them, he said, "Who do others say that I am? And what about you? Who do you say that I am?" I'm going to just suggest to you, church, that Jesus knew exactly what the people thought about Jesus. He knew that. But I think there was a reason for that, asking that question. One, it helps make sure the disciples are paying attention, but it also helps to get them thinking as they weigh these matters in their mind. Because he's asking, Jesus knew what the people were thinking. But then he asked the question, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And so now it's not about what other people are saying, it's what do you believe? And so Peter was the one that answered, and I think on behalf really of all the disciples. I don't think anybody in the room disagreed that day. As Peter answered, "You are God's Messiah. You are the Christ. You are the Son of God." What Jesus was doing at that time is it's now not about what are other people saying. And it's even deeper than what do you believe. But now it becomes a matter of, are you willing to commit to that which you claim to believe? Are you willing to stake your life on this? Are you willing to stake your life, even to the point of death, on this? Are you willing to put everything else aside and declare that Jesus is the Christ? Now, let's keep going. Verse 21. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And this was a great moment, wasn't it? Jesus has asked this question, what do the crowd say about me? What about you? What do you say? And for all the times that the disciples missed it, for all the times they may have said the wrong things and did the wrong things, they got the answer right. Peter gave a right answer. But then Jesus begins to talk about this instrument of death. The fact that he must die, be buried, and raised again on the third day. You see, even now the gospel message is being declared as Jesus talks about these things that are about to happen. Luke doesn't record this, but we do know about Matthew and Mark's account of this story. And as soon as Jesus begins to talk about this, Peter, the one that gave the right answer, took Jesus off to the side, and what is it the Bible says? He did what? He rebuked our Lord. And that's when Jesus turned to him and declared, get behind me, Satan. You have in mind the things of men, but I have in mind the things of God. God's will must work now. It is God's will that must be carried out now. And so Jesus, again, it gives us this insight that Jesus came to earth and he knew why he was here. He knew what he was about to do, and he made sure that he stuck to his mission. And so he's continuing to talk about that. Now that gets us to our text for the day. We've done a lot of background to make sure that we got where we needed to. Luke 9:23, Jesus said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet lose or forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory, and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of heaven. Jesus has talked about his death. It would involve shame. It would involve this instrument of death. But not only does he talk about the weight of the cross and what's before him, but he also talks about the weight of the cross and the way that it needs to challenge us. The big question we need to ask ourselves, I think of this passage, I think a lot of this is very plain. I think that we understand the points of where it says, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet lose or forfeit their very selves? I think we get that, don't we? Whoever's ashamed of me on earth, I'll be ashamed of him before the Father in heaven. Whoever confesses me on earth, I'll confess him. I think we get that, don't we? Now what we get and what we apply, what we get and what we obey, those might be the tough questions we need to ask today. But I do think the question that demands to be asked of us today is, what does it mean to deny ourselves, to take up our cross daily? Author A.W. Tozer talks about 3 distinctive marks of a Christian. I like these 3, and I think they really get us started in heading that right direction. The first thing that he says is that 1, we are facing only one direction. That when we start talking about being a disciple of Jesus, taking up our cross daily and following him, we face only one direction. Church, there is not room in our walk with the Lord for a divided allegiance. In fact, I don't know that phrase even could accurately exist. I think back to the verses of where Jesus says that you cannot serve both God and mammon. I think back of the verses where Jesus talked about that the Pharisees that they were saying one thing and doing another. You see, that's hypocritical. That is putting on a mask. It's putting on a facade. And what Jesus tells us is that if we're going to take up our cross daily and follow Him, I like this as a good mark, is that we will face only one direction. We will follow Jesus. There's not, I mean, the world has seen enough waffling. You know what waffling means, right? That's a good Southern term for us. It means that you just can't decide which way you want to go. It's like being at, since we talked the other night about being at Piccadilly, it's like going up to the cafeteria and you're going through the line at Piccadilly and you've got a chocolate pie or lemon pie. And when I was there with my mama, there were days that I'd want both. But you know what? You had to decide. Well, Mama, can't I just get, no, son, you can get chocolate or lemon. But Mama, I want both. And do you know what happened if I sat there and waffle long enough? I can get either one. Well, come on, if you can't make up your mind, you just won't get one this time. Here's the thing that we need to understand. We can claim all day long. We can't come here on Sunday and sing praises to God and live like we want to the rest of the week. We need to face one direction. We come here and we're singing these songs and we may do something to soothe our conscience and we may think we're doing the right thing, but we can't come here on Sunday and try to please the Lord but live for the world the rest of the week. It doesn't work. That is not the mark of a disciple, because a disciple of Jesus will face only one direction. Number two, we have no intention of turning back. Oh, I like this one. We have no intention of turning back. When I was a youth minister, we would spend a lot of time talking to our teens about sexual purity, of how important it is to make sure that true love does wait, and that we wait, and that there's a time, and when we are married, that is the appropriate time for sex. And I remember when we would do that, there would be times that may have conversation with teens, and they would say, like, and Johnny, I just don't know if I can make that commitment. Well, you need to understand that making the commitment, and we would talk about the importance of making a commitment. And at times people didn't want to make that commitment because they were scared of, you know what happens, right? If you don't make the commitment, I can tell you, you'll go ahead and turn around. It's not that easy. I remember talking to people. I remember talking to a parent. We're talking about marriage now. I remember talking to a parent whose teen was growing up in the youth group. And when that father told me of the concern he had, that he said, Johnny, I just don't know that my children will get married and remain married to the same person. The children were teens. They were teenagers. Now, I've just got to tell you this, church. Parents and grandparents, if we can't put before our teens of the value and of the importance of making a commitment to someone with the ideal that we will not turn back. If we aren't entering man, what part does this matter when we're saying that you're going to do all these things until death do you part? Well, not really, but I'm going to say I do because it's the right thing. No. Don't turn back. And then I think about today, I think of people that at times have talked to me about the importance either of coming to Christ or coming back to Christ. And I love it, man. God love you if you're here today and you're visiting or you're coming back and you haven't been here in a while and you're sitting here going, you know, I really do want a right relationship with God. Let me tell you, there comes a point where you need to make a decision. There comes a point where you have to make a decision. I've told you all the story about a gentleman, loved him to death. But I got to tell you, Mr. Tapp sat there about, in my church at least, sat back there about where Cade is today. And I would always sit behind him, apparently, because I could watch him. And during the invitation song, some of these days, we will have talked about some things we're talking about right now. And I had never seen a man that could hold on to a piece of wood as tightly as he could hold on to that pew in front of him. He never made a decision to follow Jesus. Don't let the fear of sin, y'all, we're all going to sin, we're all going to fall short, but we have to make a decision. And when we make that decision, we have the firmest of intentions of allegiance that every day we'll take up our cross and follow Jesus, because we know we will face only one direction. We also know that there is no turning back once we make that decision. And finally, number 3, we need to understand this, is that we no longer have plans of our own. We no longer have plans of our own. Man, I've just got to get down home and personal right now, because I'm looking at how the world is addressing church. I've read this real interesting article yesterday, and it was talking about how our church buildings are getting emptier and emptier on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, because people have all of these plans and they take care of all of these plans. They do all these other things, but church has become optional. Rather than worshiping with the saints being at the top of the list, and now it's gotten down here, and as long as I don't have this, and as long as I don't have this, as long as I don't have this, then, hey, preacher, I'll be here. Which, by the way, you can count on me on the second Sunday in June, and then the Sunday after Labor Day. Church, it doesn't work that way. It is important for us to be engaged in the work of the church. God has a plan for your schedule on Sundays. God has a plan for your schedule on Sundays. When God has given us His Word to read, it's not optional. It's mandatory reading. Now, it's interesting to me, our schools can send out these little letters to parents, whether it's band or whether it's this other event, they can say, you have a mandatory meeting. And man, you know what? Man, I watch parents jump and they'll shuffle a schedule because I've got to be there. It's a mandatory meeting. Church, can we declare that God has declared Sunday worship as mandatory? Can we declare that God has declared spending time in His Word as mandatory? Time in prayer is mandatory. Time in service is mandatory. It is imperative, if we are to claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, that we commit ourselves to that. We face only one direction. There is no turning back. And we don't have plans of our own, because we are simply saying, God, whatever you will is what I desire to do. Now here's the thing. Here's what I've learned, is that as we go into the world, we have things that we need to do, and we're going about each week. And we are being disciples of Jesus as we go. We take opportunity to talk to people about Jesus as we go. We take opportunity to share Jesus as we go. We take opportunity to invite them to worship with us as we go. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Y'all, I've never gotten to see the great Passion play in Eureka Springs, but I've read a lot about it. One story that I heard was about this gentleman that went to that play. Man, he went to it, and he was really just overwhelmed by what he witnessed. And afterward, he had opportunity to go back and to meet the gentleman who had portrayed Jesus in that play. And as he was visiting with him, he couldn't help but notice that the cross that the actor portraying Jesus, the cross that he'd used, was over there right behind him. And next thing you know, he's pulled out his phone and he's handed it to this actor, and he says, hey, get a picture of me with this cross. And the actor's trying to stop him, but the guy goes over there and so the cross, can't pick it up because it's heavy. Man, he starts straining, his face is red, and he kind of starts rolling a bead of sweat down his face. And he turned around and he asked the actor, he said, man, I really thought that thing would be hollow. And then the actor told him this. He said, I knew that I couldn't portray the role of Jesus unless I fully understood the weight of the cross. Church, we have come here today to gather around the table and to be reminded of the weight of the cross. But Jesus challenges us to deny ourselves, take up our cross daily, and follow Him. So this morning, if you need to come to Him and experience the forgiveness that comes through baptism. If you desire the prayers of this church family, we'd love to help you in any way we can. We invite you to come. Let's stand as we sing.